The first time I understood that my grief did not belong to me, I was standing at the kitchen window at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, watching a buggy I did not recognize turn slowly into our lane. I was 24 years old. My husband Amos had been dead for 11 days. I remember the exact color of the light, that flat pewter light that Ohio gets in the second week of November, when the fields have gone the color of old straw and the sky sits low over the barn roof like a lid pressed down on a pot. There was a kettle on the stove behind me. I had not put it there. Someone had. Someone was always putting a kettle on the stove in those days. The women came in shifts, the way women in my community always come in shifts when there has been a death, bringing casseroles wrapped in dish towels, bringing bread, bringing quiet hands to fold my laundry, bringing everything except the one thing I actually wanted, which was to be left alone with the shape of him in the bed. The buggy stopped at the hitching post. I watched a man I did not know very well step down. He was wearing his good black coat. He was carrying his hat in his hand before he had even reached the porch, which is the small, particular gesture Amish men make when they are about to say something they know a woman does not want to hear. Behind him, my father-in-law climbed down slower, and behind him, the bishop. 3 men, 3 black coats, 11 days. I want to tell you what I learned that afternoon. I want to tell you the way Amish widows always learn things, quietly, sideways, in a kitchen that still smells like the man who is no longer in it. My name is Martha. This is Hannah the Amish Girl, the channel where I tell the stories I could not tell inside the fence. The stories about what a body learns to survive when the community that raised it decides that your grief, your body, and your future are not private things but shared property, arranged by men in warm parlors while you stand at a window watching the light change. I grew up old order Amish in Holmes County, Ohio. I was married at 19. I was widowed at 24. I left the community at 26. And the story of how I left has to begin here, at this window, on this afternoon, with 3 men walking up my porch steps while my husband's coat was still hanging on the peg by the door. If this is your first time here, I am glad you found your way. Subscribe. Turn on the little bell so the next story finds you. Leave me a word in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me the season outside your window right now. Tell me if you have ever been someone whose grief was not allowed to be quiet. I read every single one. I promise you that. Now, let me tell you about the widow's year. There's a thing in my community that does not have an official name. It is not written in the ordnung. It is not preached from the bench on a Sunday. It exists the way many things in Amish life exist. Everyone knows, no one says. In the outside world, when a young woman's husband dies, there is a period called mourning, and it is understood to belong to her. She decides its length, she decides its shape. If she chooses to remarry in 6 months, she may. If she chooses to remain alone for the rest of her life, she may. Her grief is her own weather. In my community, a young widow's grief has an expiration date. The date is not written down, but it is known. Between 9 and 12 months. A year, more or less. 12 turnings of the moon. 1 full circle of planting and harvest. And when that year has closed, she is expected to be married again. To a widower, usually, or to an older bachelor from a nearby district. Someone chosen carefully by the men who sit in warm parlors and decide such things over pie. Because a farm cannot run without a man. Because children cannot be raised without a father. Because a young woman living alone is a splinter in the wood of the community. She cannot be sanded down, she cannot be pulled out, and eventually she starts to swell and split what surrounds her. Because a woman in her 20s without a husband is what my mother-in-law once called, without looking at me, a question the community has to answer. The hierarchy is old. God, then bishop, then husband, then wife. When the husband dies, there is a rung missing in that ladder, and the community does not tolerate missing rungs. The rung will be replaced. Someone will find you a new one. Kindly, carefully, without asking you which shape of rung you preferred. I did not know, at 24, standing at that window, that this was what I was about to be told. I only knew that 3 men were walking up my porch and that Amos had been in the ground 11 days. Amos and I had been married 5 years. I want to be careful here because I know how this story could be told wrong. Amos was not a monster. Amos was not cruel. Amos was, in fact, the softer of the two of us. A slow-moving man. A man who thought before he spoke. A man who could sit on the porch for an hour just watching the martins come and go from the barn. He had large, careful hands. He was not clever with words. When he was pleased with me, he would touch the small of my back very briefly as he passed behind me in the kitchen. And that was the whole of it, the whole of his tenderness. And it was enough. It had to be. It was what we had been given. We met at a singing in Sugar Creek when I was 17 and he was 20. I remember his shoulders under the black suspenders and the way he did not look at me directly the first 3 times we spoke. The courtship shyness of Amish boys who have been told all their lives that a girl is something to be treated carefully, like a piece of good china no one has yet dropped. We were married on a Thursday in late October when the maples had gone the color of a barn door. 300 guests, 4 hours of preaching, roast chicken, creamed celery, mashed potatoes, 7 kinds of pie. My hands shook when I bent to serve his plate. I remember the bishop's wife nodding at me across the room. A small nod, the kind Amish women give each other when a girl has crossed over into being a wife, and there is no going back. Our first daughter came within the first year, then a son, then another daughter, 3 small children under the age of 5 when Amos went into the barn on a Tuesday morning to feed the horses and did not come back out. They told me it was his heart. He was 30, his heart. I was 24 and I had 3 children, and there was a farm, and there were 41 head of cattle, and there was a mortgage held by an Amish lender in the next district over, and there was the whole shape of a life that had been built for 2 people to carry. And one of the 2 people was now lying in the front room, in the pine box my father and my brothers-in-law had built through the night, with a black cloth over the lower half of his body and his good white shirt buttoned up to the throat. The women came. The women always come. They came for the viewing, and they came for the funeral, and they came the day after the funeral, and the day after that, and the day after that. For 11 days, my kitchen was never empty. There were hands stripping the beans I had not thought to strip. There were hands folding the laundry I could not bring myself to touch because his shirts were in it. There was Sarah, my sister, who slept on the floor of the front room the first 3 nights so I would not wake up alone. There was Rebecca, my closest friend, who brought her nursing baby and sat on the porch with me at dusk and did not say anything at all, which was the most healing thing anyone did that whole week. And then, on the 11th day, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the bishop's buggy turned into my lane. They sat at my kitchen table. I remember this the way you remember things when your body has gone very still. The bishop was on the bench facing the window. His name was Yost. He was 71 that year, and he had buried more people than most men will meet in a lifetime, and he had a way of folding his hands on a table that made the table itself seem to become quieter. My father-in-law sat beside him, and the third man, the one I did not know well, sat across from them with his hat still in his hands, turning it slowly by the brim the way men do when they are being present at something they did not choose to be present at. His name was Ephraim. He was 38. He was a widower from the next district over. His wife had died 2 years earlier of a growth in her stomach, and he was raising 4 children on his own, and he had a farm that touched, at its southeast corner, the fence line of the farm that Amos had left me. I did not put these facts together right away. I did not put them together at all that afternoon. That afternoon, my mind was still trying to make room for the fact that Amos would not be walking in through the door with cold hands in a few minutes to warm them at the stove. The bishop spoke first. He always did. He asked how I was managing. He asked about the children. He asked whether the community's help had been sufficient. His voice was warm. I want to be honest about that because I want you to understand what this thing sounds like when it is happening. It does not sound like coercion. It sounds like a grandfather who has come to make sure you are eating. Then he said, "Martha, we have been praying for you." I said, "Thank you, Bishop." Then he said, and I remember this sentence exactly the way you remember the sentence a doctor uses to tell you what is growing inside you. "We have also been praying about you." About me, not for me, about. There is a difference. In the outside world, that difference might slide past. In my community, that preposition was the whole of it. That preposition told me that the men in the warm parlors had already been meeting, that the future of my body and my children and my farm and my house and my animals and my remaining life had already been sat with, weighed, prayed over, discussed. 11 days. Emma's had been in the ground 11 days. The bishop did not say the word remarriage. He never says the word directly. The bishop's gentleness is his instrument. He plants the sentence and lets it grow in the silence he leaves after it. What he said instead was, "A farm this size with 3 little ones is not a burden a woman should have to shoulder for very long." And then he looked very briefly at Ephraim, and Ephraim looked at his hat, and my father-in-law looked at the tabletop. And I understood. I want to describe what happened in my chest because I have thought about it a great deal since then, and I did not have the words for it that afternoon. And I do have some of them now. I felt cold first, a cold that started under my breastbone and spread outward, the way you feel it when a door opens behind you in winter. I felt a kind of shame next, a shame that made no sense. That was not mine. That had been handed to me the way you hand a child a plate of food you do not want them to refuse. And underneath both of those things, quieter than either, I felt something that in the outside world would eventually be given the name violation. But I did not have that word yet. That word was 2 years and a therapist's office away from me. What I had that afternoon was the framework I had been raised inside. And the framework told me this: a widow is a woman with a hole in her house where a man used to be. The community fills holes. That is what the community does. That is what the community is for. To refuse the filling is to say the hole itself is precious to you. And to hold a hole as precious as Hachmut, is pride, is the sin that will slowly starve you until you learn to be quiet. So I did not say what my body wanted to say, which was, "My husband has been dead 11 days. Please leave my kitchen." I said, "I have been thinking only of the children, Bishop." He nodded kindly and reached across the table and put his old brown hand very briefly over mine. He said, "Of course you have. That is why we are thinking of you." And Ephraim across the table cleared his throat and said, in a voice I remember as being decent, genuinely decent, not cruel, not eager, only tired, "I did not come to press, Martha. I only came to be known to you." To be known to me. The whole thing was over in 40 minutes. They drank a cup of coffee. They ate a slice of the pie Rebecca had left. The bishop said a short prayer at the door. The 3 men walked back down the porch steps, climbed into the buggy, and rolled slowly back up the lane in the pewter light. I stood at the window and watched them go, and the kettle behind me had gone cold, and my husband's coat was still on the peg by the door, and I understood, the way you understand a season has changed, that my widow's year had just begun. Before I go on, I want to say something to you. If you have stayed with me this long, I want you to know that these stories are not easy to tell, and they are not easy to listen to. And the fact that you are here, sitting somewhere in the world with a screen in your lap or a phone in your hand, matters to me in a way I cannot fully explain. If this is resonating with something in your own life, subscribe. Stay. There are so many more stories I have not yet told. And leave me a comment when you can. Tell me the smallest thing in this story that felt familiar to you. Tell me the room you are sitting in. Tell me what season is outside your own window right now. I read every single one. Now I'm going to tell you about the year itself, because the widow's year is not one afternoon in a kitchen. The widow's year is 365 afternoons in a kitchen, each of them with a different shape of pressure. And I want you to understand what that pressure looks like when it is doing its slow, patient work. The first year was silence. Not the silence of loneliness. That was there too, but that was mine. And I welcomed it. The silence, I mean, was the community's silence about the visit. Nobody said the bishop had come. Nobody said Ephraim had been at my table. It was as if the whole thing had happened underneath a piece of cloth. But everyone knew. Everyone always knows. I could feel it in the way the women at the next quilting frolic looked at me and then away too quickly. I could feel it in the small extra kindness Rebecca began to show me. The kindness a friend shows a woman who has been marked without having been told she has been marked. The second tier was food. I know this will sound strange in the outside world, but in my community, food is a language. And in the weeks after the bishop's visit, The food began to speak. Ephraim's mother started sending things over: a jar of chow chow the first week, a loaf of choufli bread the second, a basket of apples from his orchard. Each gift came with a small, folded note in the careful, sloped handwriting of an older Amish woman, and each note said very little. "Thinking of you, Martha," or "The children may enjoy these." But each note was, if you knew how to read it, a sentence in a longer conversation about my future. The third tier was the mother-in-law visit. Amos's mother came in the second month. She sat with me at the same kitchen table where the bishop had sat. She was a small woman with hands that never stopped moving. She was shelling peas that afternoon, I remember, and I remember the small, dry click of each pea against the tin bowl. She did not look at me while she spoke. That was how I knew what she was about to say was hard. She said, "Martha, I loved my son. He was my firstborn, and I loved him, and I loved him well enough to say to you now what he would have wanted said to you if he had been given the chance." She did not lift her eyes from the peas. She said, "A woman young enough to still have children owes the next children to somebody." And then, in the same voice, without a pause, "You are a good mother. You have always been a good mother. Do not let pride cost these three little ones a father." She left before dark. She kissed the top of each grandchild's head. She did not kiss me. She had not kissed me since my wedding day. The fourth tier was Lydia. Every one of my stories has a Lydia in it, and this one is no different. Lydia was 79 years old that year. She had been widowed twice, first at 22, then again at 46. And she had remarried both times, and she had outlived both of the second husbands. And she was, by the winter of my widow's year, living alone in the Dottie house behind her son's farm, sewing quilts for a woman in Berlin who sold them to tourists. I went to see her in February. There was snow on the garden. I had walked the mile between our houses because I did not want to be seen in the buggy. I did not want the sound of my own wheels on the lane telling the community which house I had visited. Lydia was at her quilting frame in the front room when I came in. She did not stand up. She did not offer coffee. She only tilted her head toward the chair on the other side of the frame, and I sat down and I picked up a needle without either of us saying anything, and we quilted for maybe 20 minutes in complete silence before she spoke. She spoke without looking at me. Her needle kept moving. She said, "You have come about the year." I said, "Yes." She said, "They chose him already." I said, "Yes." She said, "I know who. Do not tell me who. I know who." And then, still without looking up, still with the needle moving through the fabric in that small, patient way older Amish women have, she said the sentence that changed the shape of what I understood about my community. She said, "Martha, listen to me. It is not that they are cruel. It is that they do not know any other way to keep the fence standing. A widow left long enough alone is a hole in the fence. The wind gets in, the wolves get in. The other women start to wonder what is on the other side of the hole, so they patch the hole. They patch it with whatever man is nearest. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Then understand this too. I was patched twice. Both times I let them. Both times I was patching myself into a wall I had not asked to be part of. If you cannot do it, if you cannot let them patch you, you had better start thinking now in February about where you would go, because the year will end in November. It always ends in November, and when November comes, they will not ask you again the way they asked you in the kitchen. They will simply expect that the wedding has already been discussed." She threaded a new length of thread. She did not look at me. She said, "I lost one at the end. A husband. I loved him. It was not enough." She did not say anything else. I sat with her for another hour. When I left, she did not walk me to the door. She only lifted one hand, very slightly from the quilting frame, the smallest wave I had ever received from a woman in my life. And I walked the mile home through the snow, and I understood that the sentence I had come for had been given to me, and that the rest of the year would have to be spent deciding what to do with it. I do not want to make this story longer than it needs to be, and I know I'm asking a great deal of you to sit with me through this much of it. But I want you to understand what the widow's year does to the inside of a woman. Because I think there are women listening to me right now who have lived something like it in a shape they could not name. The widow's year is not one decision. The widow's year is 1,000 small decisions, made every morning at the kitchen sink, about how much of yourself you are willing to give away in order to remain acceptable to the people who watched you grow up. I went to church every other Sunday. I sat on the women's side, behind the married women, ahead of the maidels, in the small gap the widows are allowed to occupy, a gap that is understood to be temporary. Ephraim sat on the men's side. He did not look at me. He was, I will say again, a decent man. He did not court me the way a bachelor courts a girl. He waited. He was patient. His patience was itself a form of pressure, but I do not blame him for that. He had been told, as I had been told, that the fence needed patching, and he was doing what a decent man does when the community assigns him a piece of the fence. His mother came again in April. She brought seed potatoes. She said casually that Ephraim had begun repairing the fence between our two properties. His sister came in June. She brought a bolt of dark blue fabric, the color used for a second wedding dress. She said casually that Ephraim's oldest daughter had asked whether she would ever have a mom again. The bishop came in August. He did not sit down this time. He stood in my doorway with his hat in his hands and he said, "Martha, the harvest is coming. It is a large harvest for a woman alone." I said, "The community has been helping." He said, "The community cannot help forever." And then he said, the sentence I had been waiting for since February. The sentence Lydia had prepared me for. He said, "It would ease many hearts, Martha, to see a wedding announced before the leaves turn." Before the leaves turn. He tipped his hat. He left. I stood in the doorway and watched his buggy roll back up the lane in the late summer light. And I understood that I had 6 weeks. I want to tell you now about the moment I decided to leave. And I want to tell you the way it actually happened. Because I have noticed in the years since that women expect the leaving moment to be dramatic, and mine was not. It was a Wednesday afternoon in the third week of September. I was hanging laundry in the yard. There was a north wind coming down the valley, the first cold wind of the year, the wind that tells the corn it is time. And I had my back to the house, and I was pinning up a shirt. It was one of Amos's shirts. I do not know why I was still washing them. I had not thrown them out. I had not given them away. Every Wednesday for 10 months, I had washed his shirts and hung them on the line, and every Wednesday I had folded them and put them back in the drawer where he had kept them. Nobody had asked me to stop. Nobody had asked me to keep doing it. It was just the pattern my hands had learned when I was 19 years old, and my hands had not yet been told that the pattern was over. I pinned the shirt up. The wind caught it. It moved on the line the way a body moves when it is walking, slowly from the shoulders, and for one full second I let myself believe it. And then the wind dropped, and the shirt fell still, and it was only a shirt, and Amos was still dead, and Ephraim was still waiting at the fence line, and the bishop was still counting the leaves. I sat down in the grass. I did not cry. I sat there for maybe 40 minutes, and I watched the shadow of the shirt move a little way along the ground as the sun turned, and at the end of the 40 minutes, I understood something. The way you understand a season has changed. I understood that the community was not going to give me my grief back. I understood that no year would ever be long enough, because the year had never been about grief in the first place. The year had been about the fence, and the fence would not stop needing to be patched. And there would always be an Ephraim, and after Ephraim, there would be someone else, and if by God's grace I outlived them too, there would be a third, and my body would go on being a plot of ground the community assigned to whichever man had a piece of fence adjoining mine. I stood up. I took the shirt down. I folded it. I carried it into the house. I put it for the first time into a bag, not into the drawer. And that night, when the children were asleep, I went out to the barn and I counted the money in the jar behind the second beam. The egg money. The sewing money. The small money a woman keeps because a woman always keeps a small money, even when she does not yet know what she is keeping it for. There was enough. I will not tell the story of the leaving today because it belongs to a different video, and it deserves its own room. I will tell you only that it was a single suitcase, and a phone shanty at the edge of the district, and a Mennonite woman in town who had helped others before me and did not ask questions, and a small rented apartment on the third floor of a building that smelled like other people's cooking. I will tell you that I took the 3 children with me. I will tell you that my mother in law's face, seen through the window of a buggy as it passed me one afternoon in town, looked at me and then through me, the way a person looks at a piece of glass, and that I understood in that single second that I had been shunned. I will tell you that the letters I sent home came back unopened. I will tell you that Ephraim, whom I do not blame and have never blamed, married a widow from a different district within the year. I will tell you that Lydia died the following spring, and I was not told, and I found out from a woman at the grocery store 6 months after the funeral. I will tell you that for a long time after I left, I did not know how to describe what had happened to me. Because in the outside world, no one had put the bishop in my kitchen. No one had put Ephraim at the fence line. No one had assigned me a second husband before the ground had frozen over the first. And so it seemed, when I tried to explain it to English women, that nothing had really happened at all. 2 years after I left, I sat in a small beige office across from an English woman with plants on every windowsill and reading glasses she kept losing. She listened to the whole story. She did not interrupt. When I was finished, she took her glasses off and she said the sentence that gave me the vocabulary I'd been missing my whole life. She said, "Martha, what you are describing is coercive control. It is not less real because it was gentle. It is more effective because it was gentle." She said, "Consent is not a door you walk through once at an altar. Consent is a room you have to be able to leave." She said, "The most effective systems of control are the ones that feel exactly like love. A community that will not hold your grief has not earned the right to arrange your future." She said one more thing, and I have carried it with me every day since. She said, "A widow's year is not grief. A widow's year is a countdown. And any system that puts a countdown on a woman's body is not a system of care. It is a system of ownership dressed in the clothing of care." I put my head down on her desk and I cried the way I had not cried at Amos's funeral. Because at Amos's funeral, I had been counting the days I'd left. And in her office for the first time, I understood that I had stopped counting. I want to be careful before I end this to say something I say at the end of every one of these stories. The bishop was not a monster. The bishop was 71 years old and had been raised inside the same silence I was raised inside, and he had spent his whole life patching fences he had not built. My father-in-law was not a monster. Ephraim was not a monster. Ephraim was a decent, tired, honest man who had lost his own wife and was trying to raise 4 children and had been handed a piece of fence and told to mend it. My mother-in-law was not a monster. She had loved Amos, and she had loved me in the only way her framework had ever taught her how to love another woman, which was to prepare that woman for the next patching. The system is the thing. The system is always the thing. I do not hate my community. I miss them. I miss the smell of my sister's kitchen. I miss the way our voices sounded in the barn on a Sunday morning. I miss the tick of the clock in my mother's front room. I miss Amos every single day of my life. And I do not think there is a world in which I will stop missing him. The Amish gave me my faith and my work ethic, and my hands that know how to make a life out of very little, and my belief that a community can carry a person when a person cannot carry herself. They also gave me a widow's year, and the widow's year was not theirs to give. If you are still with me, I want to say this to you. If you've ever been someone whose grief was put on a schedule by other people, I see you. If you have ever sat in a kitchen while men in warm coats decided the shape of your next 20 years, I see you. If you have ever hung a dead man's shirt on a line for 10 months because your hands did not yet know how to stop, I see you. If you have ever been told kindly by people who loved you that the hole in your life needed to be patched for the good of the fence, I see you. If you have ever felt the whole weight of a community leaning gently on the door of your grief, telling you that it was time, that it had been long enough, that other people were waiting, I see you. If you have ever counted the money in a jar in a barn and understood in that counting that the money was not for a new kitchen or a new dress, but for a door you had not yet known you were going to walk through, I see you. You were not weak. You were not cold. You were not selfish. You were not proud. You were a woman who had been asked to give up her grief the way another woman might be asked to give up her seat on a bench. Kindly, quickly, without fuss. And you had the audacity, The wild, ungovernable audacity to notice that the seat was yours. Your grief belongs to you. It always did. No community, no bishop, no kind old man in a warm parlor with a slice of pie on the windowsill gets to put a countdown on the inside of your chest. Tell me in the comments what part of this story stayed with you. Tell me if there was a moment, a shirt on a line, a jar in a barn, a kitchen at 4 o'clock in the afternoon that felt like your kitchen, your line, your jar. Tell me your own story if you are ready to tell it. I read every single one. I promise you that. Subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl if you have not already. There is so much more I have not yet said about the shirts I hung, about the letters I sent home, about the woman I became on the third floor of that apartment building that smelled like other people's cooking. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life. Your grief is a whole country. It always was.